Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Richard here. I will have to leave my camera off. I had a meeting all morning and I was cutting out. So open reach are working in the street. So the advice I got was to put the camera off to obviously save on the signal or something. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. We'll make it. I think with that we're probably ready. It is 2:00, and can I welcome you all to this Audit and Governance meeting this afternoon. It's fortunately these papers that are before us today have been split off because last year it was too bulky to have, to be going through these statements of accounts and doing other work as well. So there is another meeting being arranged now in July the 30th where we will do other matters. Thank you all for your attendance. Have we got any apologies? I think I've got one. I think is Caris Edwards, and I think
Councillor Gwilym Jones, Chair.
Yep, Councillor Gwilym Jones. Yep.
Councillor David Thomas apologised, but I'm able to join you remotely from away from home. So round that about.
Well done for making the effort. So that's good. So with that, have we got any declarations of interest? It doesn't appear as though we have, and I think then if we haven't got any declarations of interest, it's a case then of moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting. I don't know whether there is anything in there. I'll go through them line by line, or unless anybody wants to pick anything out before we get there. I'll go through line to line. Number 3, the internal audit annual report. I've got the annual report of the Governance and Audit Committee, number 4. And I think it's all pretty straightforward. And the other was the proposed forward work programme, number 5. So I think we can accept that there are nothing raised with the minutes of the previous meeting. So I need a proposer and a seconder to accept those minutes. Can I have a proposer?
I propose, Mr. Chair, Richard Griffiths.
Richard Griffiths is proposing.
And I need second, Councillor Jeff Evans.
Jeff. Right. So I'll just go around the other members then. John Griffiths.
Accept.
Dylan Rees.
Accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn, accept.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn, accept.
Richard Griffiths proposed it, didn't he? Peter Roach. Yep. And then my vice chairman, Dilwyn.
Accept.
Thank you very much indeed. So with that, then we move on to the next item, which is the annual governance statements. And I think Caris Edwards is not. She's made apologies. So I presume is it going to be Gethin that's going to be involved in that?
Yeah.
Gethin,
Mr. Cadeirydd.
Good afternoon,
yeah,
Chair.
Can I just say before we start, he looks in tremendous fettle today, and he's got every reason to. One of his sons, I thought they were very good athletes. I didn't realise they were very academic, but I understand he's either got 12 or 13 O-levels with, what's the other word, with O-levels with not just A-levels, he's got A-level, can you help me get in?
A stars, I think you're looking for, Peter.
I've got it. I've got it. So can I congratulate you? And I'm sure the whole committee will. You must be a very, very proud father. So we'll let you go off now. We'll hear what you're going to give us now with this report.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's very embarrassing at the start of such a meeting.
You deserve it.
Very proud, yes, indeed. Guy, give me the cover.
I take this opportunity now just to go through the governance statement, the annual governance statement. I think it's important that we as a county council can evidence and give that assurance to the county council that we do have the correct governance arrangements in place in order to ensure we
Get in before you go any further. I'm getting a problem. Is it translation? I can't seem to find translation, or I'm not getting any translation.
Councillor Jeff Evans, is Sean here. If you could, the option should be on the top right-hand corner of your screen. There should be 3 dots. And then
Oh, I've got it under more now. Yes, sorry.
more. And then if you select interpretation, and then
English.
the English channel, then you should receive the translation.
Thank you very much. Apologies for that.
Thank you.
Apologies to you, Gethin, stopping
No.
your full flow.
No apologies needed, Jeff. Dim problem.
Yes, as I was saying, I think it's important that we can evidence that we as a county council do have the correct governance arrangements in place to ensure that we can evidence that we are being governed properly and that we are meeting the expectations of what is needed by us annually, and therefore the paper or the governance statement is presented to you as a committee so that you can review it and approve it as a annual governance statement in draft form, which is obviously going to be a wider context today as you talk about the wider finance arrangements. It's important to note at the beginning like this that the way that we do act within Anglesey, we obviously are talking about how we meet the expectation of the KIPFA code and Solace and their core principles that they have as part of the framework. But we also have 6 key themes that are aligned with those expectations, and that is recognised in relation to the documentation on page 3 of the report itself. I think, once again, going back, what the statement evidences, and I sincerely hope it does so, is that Anglesey are using their money, their public money, in a way that is safe and that we account for it appropriately, and that it is used in a way that is effective and efficient. As regards showing that we are dealing with that in an effective manner, I think it's very important that we recognise within the report the political management structure which exists, and I think on page 7 that is recognised and shown in a diagram form. And I think what's important to recognise this year, as it's been such a different year to usual, is the box at the bottom which shows that delegation given to officers to go away and do the day-to-day work. And I'll come back to that in turn. As regards reviewing effectiveness, I think it's very important to be able to give you evidence that the council does have the arrangements in place to be able to ensure that matters are being done appropriately, and that is through a combination of evaluation of results and constant monitoring during the year, reviews of relevant documentation during the year, reviews against progress against the corporate plan, which happens quarterly, accepting and relating to feedback that we get from our regulators, regularly and the relationship we have with people like Eston, CIW and Audit Wales, and also obviously different interviews that happen with key officers and so on, and also to ensure that we have the framework available where the senior leaders team and the executive drive and contribute to decisions. And therefore, I think by looking at that way of being effective, what the annual government statement hopefully gives you is some kind of assurance that we have the correct processes in place to be able to meet the requirements in an efficient way. And as regards being efficient, what we also recognise is the KIPFA key principles. And on page 9 of the statement, we do note that we have evidence which shows that we are good against the core principles of the SIPFA framework. And when we talk about good, it's important to recognise that we are working to a way of thinking where good is like we have lots of strengths and no important areas where we need to improve significantly. And that doesn't mean that we don't have any room for improvement, but that there are no key areas for significant improvements. That's the definition of good. So as regards behaving with integrity, we know we are good. Ensuring openness and comprehensive engagement, we say good. Defining outcomes in terms of sustainable economic, social, cultural and environmental benefits, we know we are good. We also know we are good against determining the interventions necessary to optimize the achievement of the intended outcomes, also developing the entity's capacity within the organization to be able to develop individuals, also managing risks and performance through robust internal control. We say we are good, and also that we are good in relation to implementing good practices in transparency, reporting and audit to deliver. Now, that is fine, isn't it, in its as it is, and I think we can evidence, if you remember from the diagram we noted previously, and the fact that matters were delegated to officers and from the different committees, there's no more important here where that delegation has been needed than over the last 12 months, and the way that the council has responded to the pandemic and the challenges linked to the pandemic that have come our way as a result. And on page 10, what that note states is how we've gone about things through that delegated role, through the chief executive and leader, to be able to ensure and set up an EMRT that met regularly during the pandemic to be able to deal with and make decisions regularly and in a timely manner that made a difference. And with that, as regards making that difference, we believe that the pandemic, we've planned for a significant number of deaths, we've protected and safeguarded the workforce, we've ensured an adequate and standard personal PPE supply, we've protected and supported children of key workers in our care hubs, and we've also adapted the workforce in a short space of time, so we are more or less, as we are today, working in a way that is much more consistent and apparent than it's been in the past. We've also provided regular communication and ensured the welfare of staff. So the last year has been very challenging, but as regards governance, we believe that we've been able to get to grips with the challenges, the relevant challenges. And I think what the governance statement also notes is as regards the internal audit report of ourselves, that the conclusion comes to the fact that during the last 12 months, the opinion of the head of audit and risk of the organisation is that the organisation has the effective framework for managing risk and internal management, and that again gives assurance to us that the expected matters are in place. But while that is important, and that while we have the process that has the necessary governance processes, obviously through the statement we need to be able to evidence what needed to be improved and what has been done. And I think from page 13 and 14 of the statement, that does recognise what needed to be improved last year, and page 13 of the report recognises now what we need to be dealing with over the next 12 months as regards the governance elements. And those obviously show the ethos of having an continuous improvement mindset. We need to ensure that any new projects delayed because of the pandemic are moved forward on appropriate pace. We need to ensure that recommendations of external audit are actioned and monitored using 4Action, and that you as a committee receive a an annual report on them. We also recognise that matters related to the Local Government and Election Wales Act 2021 are implemented accordingly. And it's important to recognise there that we do have an action plan in place, but also that a number of the different elements are expected at different times during the year. We also need to be acting the model as to 3 lines of assurance to assist us as a council to map that assurance on our behalf, and also that we can monitor the impacts of the COVID pandemic and the resources needed by the services. So in its summary, really, that's what the report notes to you as a committee. It recognises how we have the necessary governance arrangements in place in order to make sure that we meet our expectations within our current limitations. So I hope that gives you a taste of the statement as it stands. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Very sorry. Yeah, I thought that was a very comprehensive report, and which we were very grateful to receive. I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2 questions that people would like to ask. Can you please indicate them? Can't see anybody at the moment.
Mr. Chair, Richard Griffiths.
Yeah, Richard. Thank you.
Dim question.
Thank you. It's not a question specifically. I'd just like to thank Gethin and the team for the comprehensive report. Agree totally what Gethin is saying in relation to how the authority are using the money in the best way. And I would just like to say thank you of making good use of the picture of Porthwen noted on page 1. It's between Kemais and Amlwch, so thank you for using that photo as well.
That was a good plug. Thank you very much. I don't know. Yes, I'm sure Dilwyn. I know that Dilwyn last year was a little bit concerned about the layout of all this and the difficulty. But I'm sure he's going to agree that it was a much easier to follow, and it was much more benefit. Yes, Dilwyn, you're on mute as well at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to endorse your remarks about the great improvement in the layout of the AGS. I think it is now much more readable. The layout is more logical. And for that, I think we should be very sort of congratulatory. Inevitably, when I get on my feet, figuratively, I have a but. And I think the challenge for the council, as far as governance is concerned, is that in the process of self-assessing against the core principles, I had a look earlier today at the AGS for 2017 to 2018. And that, of course, refers to the same core principles. And what we have today in terms of self-assessment of our performance against the 9 principles hasn't changed. In other words, if we were to be continually improving our governance, I would have expected at some stage that the assessments would have changed. In fact, we've maintained the same self-assessment scores for the last 5 years. And whether this is something with which the council is content, or whether it is a criticism of the way in which self-assessment is carried out, I think it is really something that we should examine. Thank you.
I'm sure that will be noted. Is anybody else? I can't see anybody else's hands up. No, I think that concludes it. I think that we have 2 recommendations.
Sorry. Mr. Cadeirydd.
Sorry, Dylan.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to raise a similar point to what Mr. Dilwyn Evans has raised. The report does read very well. It's a positively. I'd like to congratulate all the staff for the excellent work that they've done in that regard. But as has been referred to, the table on page 9 is a self-assessment of how effective our governance framework is. And the question I would ask is, has there been any independent input in order to evidence that our self-assessment is a fair one? Because what we're doing in a way is we're marking our own homework. Is there anybody else looking at that homework to confirm that this is correct? I'm sure it is, but as I say, is there any independent verification of that? Thank you.
Anybody like to respond to that?
Shall I come back, Chair?
Yes, get in.
Yeah. Dim ond I nodi yna.
Just to note, obviously, as regards our annual assessment, it's important to recognise that good, and good is where we have noted it, is an area where we see things are working okay, and that we don't have anything of significance that needs significant improvement. Moving to the next stage means that we are leading the way nationally on different issues, so that we have, a best in show kind of practices. We haven't moved to there yet. We believe as a self-assessment that we haven't moved to that yet. As regards, is there any independent view which exists of the assessment, it's very important to keep in mind that there is an external view which exists across a variety of services across the whole body, be it, as I noted in the presentation, CIW, Estyn, Audit Wales, and in the end, the assessment that we come to of deciphering the responses that we receive from those external regulators. Once again, is that the assessment is a fair reflection of the current situation and our governance arrangements for the County Council?
Thank you very much. I was wondering, I see the Chief Executive was nodding ahead very much. Would she like to just add anything to that, or you're just in agreement?
I was just in agreement with what Gethin was saying, but accept fully the comments that have been made for improvement in future and accept those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I can't. Yep, certainly.
In response to Councillor Dylan Rees's question, of course, the statement is part of the council's accounts, and the accounts are obviously audited by Wales Audit Office. So I take it that their process won't only look at the figures when they're looking at the accounts, but they will also audit the evidence behind the statement of governance as the part of that accounts.
Thank you very much. I can't see anybody else is coming in. I think we'll go on to the recommendation then. There are two recommendations, and I'm sure I can take both recommendations together. That the Governance and Audit Committee reviews and approve the draft account governance statements that will form part of the 2020-21 Statement of Accounts. And the second recommendation, it is recommended that the committee delegates authority to the chair of the committee and the head of functions, resources and section 151 officer to make further minor amendments to the annual general governance statement prior to its inclusion in the final version of the statement of accounts. I need a proposer and a seconder. I think you'll have to shout out. I can't get anybody. Who's going to propose?
Hapus gynnig, Mr Cadeirydd.
Happy to propose Chair Councillor Alan Roberts and Councillor Margaret Roberts willing to second.
Thank you very much indeed. So can we go round now and ask John Griffiths?
Agree, accept.
Dylan Rees?
Agree.
Richard Griffiths?
Agree.
Jeff Evans?
Agree.
And Dilwyn?
Agreed, but may I also ask Councillor Rogers whether it will be in order for any minor amendments which are going to be approved or made by you and the section and Mark. Is it possible for others of us to feed in some suggested minor amendments?
I would, as chairman, I would have thought that would be perfectly in order. Do I get the agreement of 151 officer? Mark?
Yeah, that's fine. Any minor amendments, because of course these are only draft accounts. The full accounts will come back to this committee before they're signed off by the council. So there is an opportunity for you to pass your comments on, and we will look at them and incorporate any changes.
Thank you. I thought that was good clarification. Thank you very much. I think we now go on to item 4, which is the summary of the draft final accounts. And I would presume who is going to? Are you taking this, Mark?
Yes, I'll start, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah.
It's very easy to pass the buck.
This is a copy of the draft accounts, which is for 2020-21. The timetable of the code and the guidelines of Welsh Government, there was an expectation that the draft accounts would have been signed by myself by the last day of May. And the intention originally was that they would be signed by the council by the end of July. But because of the situation of the year that has gone by, Welsh Government have recognised once again, as last year, that it would be very difficult for councils to complete in line with that timetable, and therefore they have agreed that there's an extension to be able to complete the draft accounts by the end of August and to sign and publish the final accounts by the end of November. Having said that, Bethan, the Deputy Section 151 officer, was quite determined. Now, we tried to aim for the timetable that has been set out. We didn't quite succeed. I signed the draft statement of accounts on the 15th of June, but I must thank all the staff, the finance department and the rest of the council who have fed into the accounts to be able to complete the draft accounts by that date, because it's been a big challenge again this year under the circumstances. Different challenges because of new things that happened during the year, and we have to ensure how we account for all the additional expenditure correctly in the accounts. So that has been a challenge as well, in addition to the usual workload, and also our revenue and benefits manager, Mr. Geraint Jones, has retired since December, and he was a key part of some of the notes that were input into the accounts. So there was additional work to ensure that that gap was filled. And I'm not sure if this is a good or bad thing, but even myself had to get the calculator out this year to help out, which hasn't been something I haven't done for many a year, doing actual work on the accounts. But that's where we were at, and we were successful thanks to the hard work of all the staff to complete that. And I hope you as members are grateful for that work. The accounts themselves, as usual, they are in the format that is set out in the code, which includes the forward reports, the statement which more or less says the story of what happened during the year, and then we have the income and expenditure statement, the movement of balances and reserve statement, the balance sheet, the flow and the notes, and the governance statements that we have just discussed. So those are the elements that make up the accounts. And with the notes, some of them are very technical and possibly are not of much interest to someone who would read the statement of accounts, but there are some that are more interesting to the taxpayers of Anglesey possibly, who choose to read the accounts. So I was just going to run through the accounts quickly, just to explain a couple of things and to raise a couple of points, beginning with the income and expenditure statement. Page 17, I'm going to say it's 17 of the accounts, not of your pack. So the figure which is above what says Anglesey County Council 2020-21, so page 17 of that pack, you can see from that it says that the council has, that there's a deficit between the expenditure and income of 24.231 million, and if you read that and just looked at it, you'd see, well, how do we fund that and what does that mean? But in the statement itself, there are lots of figures that have gone into that for the accounts, which then come out because that the law says they are not funded from council tax and out of balances of the council. So they are taken out then in note 7. And then there's a statement then of the movement in the balances of the council on page 19. And this is what is of more interest probably to the taxpayers of Anglesey, not the figure that is in the income and expenditure statement, which doesn't mean much to anyone. But the figures in the statement on page 19 show that the general balances of the council have increased from 7.06 million to 1.59 million at the end of the year. The additional reserves have then increased from 8.76 million to 14.8 million. The HRA has increased from 8.59 million to 9.74 million. The balances of school from 197,000 to 4.0 million. So what's called reserves, it's possible that the council can use, has increased from 25.499 million to 40.89 million, 19 million, sorry, which is a significant jump and is unusual, I must stress. But this is no different to what a number of other councils across Wales are reporting in their accounts. What's happened, of course, is Welsh Government have been funding the additional costs because of COVID and the loss of income because of COVID. And in addition to that, the council have made savings by not providing some services during the year. And that's true for the council, schools, and the HRA. So those three have been affected as a result of our costs being less during the year because we haven't provided the usual services during the year. In addition to that, at the end of the financial year, Welsh Government sent a lot of grants to the councils, including ourselves and the schools. Some came without conditions, and it's a decision for the council how they spend those additional grants. And more or less, that was an additional RSG for us. And those have then found their way to the reserves. And the schools have found in the same way that they've received grants from Welsh Government. And Welsh Government are aware that it wasn't possible for schools to spend that money during the 2020-21 financial year, and they've allowed the schools to carry that money to be used in the current financial year. So of course that money then goes into the balances of the schools. And that's the reason, well, the main reason why the school balances have increased significantly. But I foresee that as schools start to reopen and to help children catch up with their education, those balances will fall significantly during this financial year. Moving on then to the balance sheet itself. So this is the value of the assets of the council. Now, the true figure of the asset, is it a true reflection of the value of the council assets? No, because a lot of council assets are not included in this. For example, our highways, our bridges, etc. There are lots of assets like that that aren't included in that figure. But this is the figure of the value of our assets that we have to include according to the code. So as you see, the value of the council's assets has fallen from 184 million to 164 million. The assets, long-term assets, have increased 15 million, which is our buildings and some of our other assets, because we spend on them through the capital projects and capital funds. Our other assets have increased as well, from 56.7 million to 66.2 million. Our cash balance has increased 5 million. Our debtors has increased about 4 million. And of course, that's not as good a news as that, because our council tax debts and so on have increased a little bit during the pandemic. We'll see how that plays out as we move forward and continue with our debt recovery process, taking people to court and so on. But it'll probably be the higher rate of debts will have to be written off during the years to come. Welsh Government have recognised that also as a risk to the councils and have given us an additional grant to help us to fund that loss. And so the main one that drives the value of the assets down, of course, is the long-term liabilities, and especially the pension fund itself. There is a long note, note 41, I think, which shows the value of the pension fund. It's a figure which is assessed by the actuary of the pension fund based on a lot of assumptions which are made, and possibly by now those assumptions have changed and it would change the figures. So it's assessment at one particular point in time. It doesn't mean that the council have to find that money to make up the deficit on it, because the plan is still open, money still goes in, money still comes out, money is invested by Gwynedd Council on behalf of Anglesey County Council, and therefore you can reassess this within a year and the figure will be totally different, and it tends to be a moving figure and one which has too much of an effect maybe on the worth of the assets which are noted in the, but that's what the code asks us to do. So that's the balance sheet. Then there's a cash flow statement on page 21, which shows, as I said, that our cash balance has gone up 5.69 million. So the notes in 28, 9 and 30 show the reasons for that, or how we have moved like that in cash balances. So we start with a deficit and the income and expenditure statement. We take out the items that where there's no cash gone out of the business, and then we change for the movement in our current assets, the debtors and the stock and so on. And then we include back in the capital expenditure and any other changes in the borrowing, and we have anything we've paid. We've paid off a significant sum of borrowing. I'm not sure if you remember a year ago or over a year ago now, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was concerned about ensuring we had enough cash in the business to keep us going, and I borrowed 10 million over a short period for a year, and that's been paid back in March 21. So that's the reason why the balances or the long-term debt has gone down there. Then moving on to the notes, as I said, some of them are of interest, some of them are very technical. There's a statement on page 23 that gives just a little bit more details on the summary of movements in the council reserves, which shows how we've moved from the initial figure to the current figure at the end of the year of 40.198. Note 1A, which gives a little bit more detail on what's going in and out of the expenditure fund and how we get to the surplus at the end of the year. Note 6 then, which is on page 28, just a statement saying that there's nothing big which has happened after we've completed the draft statement, which will affect the accounts. Of course, we'll review that statement before we sign the final final accounts, and we'll report if anything needs to be noted there that has an effect on the accounts. Note 7, I've mentioned already what comes in and out of the income and expenditure statement. Note 8 is a little bit more details on the reserves money and how they've moved on the main reserves that the council hold. Note 9 then shows the details of school balances. As I said, the balances have increased and are healthy at around 4 million. We had 13 schools last year in deficit, and by now we're down to 1 secondary school, 1 primary school and 1 special school which is still in deficit. Note 13A on page, where are we now? Page 37, which shows the we've received and paid. You'll see that the charges we've had there is only £50,000 compared to 149 the year before, and the reason for that now is that interest rates were lucky to get 0.1% on our cash at the moment. And then note 15, which gives more details on the assets of the council property and other assets that we hold, vehicles and so on. So it just breaks down the worth of our assets down to different categories there. And the same thing in note 17. We have assets, cultural assets, which are recognised separately in the accounts there, heritage assets there, which includes the Melin Llynon Mill and the jail in Beaumaris and the court in Beaumaris, which have been transferred now to Beaumaris Town Council. Note 20 then on page 46 and 47, which shows how we've spent on the capital side during the year and how that's been financed, grants and borrowing and so on, and what effect that has on the capital financing requirements, and that will be part of the Treasury Management report that will come in during the year, the usual one there. Note 24. Debts, as I said, our debtors have increased, council tax and the main one, council rent, which has increased a little bit as well. Note 27 then is provisions we made in the accounts for what cost the council will face. It doesn't mean that we'll have to pay these out, but we are aware there's a high risk we'll have to pay something out under these headings. So we're making provision in the accounts for that. So the biggest one, of course, is the Penheskin site, where there's still a duty on us to look after that site. And there is a sum included there for, there's a culvert which runs under the land, and there is a risk that could, if that did collapse, there would be significant work to fix that culvert. So we're just holding that money in case. Possibly one that will be of interest to you, of course, is note 33, the members' allowances and how much we've paid out in members' allowances. 693,000 compared to 700,000 last year. The allowances are a little bit lower because we had empty seats during the year, 1 for most of the year, and then it went up to 2 just before the end of the financial year. So there's a little saving there. And then note 34, which lists the officers' remuneration in the bands for council officers and school officers, and there are some then noting specific officers in the second section of that note there, and the sum that they received in wages and other allowances, as well as their contribution, the council's contribution into the pension fund on that. Note 37, grant income, which shows income we've received through grants as part of the income that the council receives to run the services. 172 million grants that have come in for different things, and they've been listed there, and that includes, of course, the RSG and the capital grants that we receive and have received. Note 42 then, what's called contingent liabilities. Contingent liabilities are similar enough to the provisions I was talking about previously. There is a possible risk we'll have to pay something out, but the difference is with a contingent liability and a provision is with a contingent liability, we don't know how much, so we can't put a figure in the accounts, but we note in that note that there is a risk that we'll possibly have to make a payment sometime for these items. The first one, the Section 117 Mental Health Act 1983, that's been in our accounts for many a year now. We have made payments out. We're not aware of any cases at the moment, but that doesn't mean that there won't be any cases in future. People still have the right to make a case against the council, but I'm not aware at the moment that there are any. And then note 51 then on page 83 of the accounts. These are the new things that we've had to arrange how we account for these, and a lot of these, especially the COVID grants, we've been acting as an agent for Welsh Government, so the expenditure isn't included in the income and expenditure statement, but we do note what the council has paid out on behalf of Welsh Government, and you can see there's over 41 million pounds in business grants that have gone out during the year. And then note 52, the accounting policies, and there are no changes that I'm aware of there. Possibly Bethan would correct me if I'm wrong, of any changes to our policies for our accounts. And then the annual governance statement will then go at the end of the accounts. We'll include it at the end of the accounts and put it in. And then also there's from page 108 onwards, there are the HRA housing revenue account is separate, so the expenditure and income of the HRA is included in our accounts, but there are separate notes which give more details on the HRA on those pages. So, as I say, I've signed the draft accounts off. We've gone to the external auditors, which have started the process of auditing, and the intention of us and the auditors is that work will be completed and they will have published their draft report by September. The report of the external auditors and the final accounts will then go back to the audit committee in September and then on to the full council at the end of September to be signed off. But as I say, technically we do have till the end of November to do that work. So with that, I've gone through the accounts quickly. Happy to take any questions by any members, or I'm sure I'll have to pass it on to Bethan to answer any question on the accounts. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just thank you, Mark, for the way that you took us through that by pointing out the page numbers and guiding us through. That made a tremendous difference. We were able to follow it right through. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions? I am looking if.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, I've got somebody.
I've raised my hand, maybe you missed it. And I'm
Yep.
aware that Councillor Alan Roberts has also. Could I
Thank you.
ask a question, Mark? Nair yn Gymraeg. Ga I ofyn cwestiwn?
I'll ask in Welsh. Can I ask a question, please, Mark, about note 24, the debtors? The debts have increased to over 6 million, and I can see that the council tax debts and rent arrears are quite high. Has research been undertaken into the specific reasons why these debts have increased? I do have concerns about poverty and, of course, mental health and, you know, financial worries that people have. Has anybody looked into this and into the reasons behind the increase in debts? At the beginning of the pandemic, and unfortunately the timing wasn't the best, and the council tax bills were sent out as lockdown was starting. But what the council did was to move a lot of the payments from people to ensure that we didn't take out the direct debit payments in April and May. So we did move the instalments forward, and some have gone beyond the end of the financial year as well. We've tried to be as flexible as possible with people facing financial difficulties because of COVID. We haven't held as many sessions in court. We've only held 2 or 3, where usually we'd have 7 or 8 court sessions during a year. So we haven't progressed as far with the debt recovery process as we would do in a usual year. We usually collect around 96 to 97% of the debt in the year. This year, or for 2021, we're around 1.5% lower than we'd usually be. So at the end of the day, it's important that we do collect this money, but we are trying to be as flexible as possible with people facing financial difficulties. And we want to help them to come to an agreement about how they are going to repay their debts. We'll see more of this, and how many people who can't pay during this year, I think. And I think the council will possibly have to write off more debts as people receive advice and use the different methods open to them to ensure that they don't have to pay their debts. For example, they can make themselves bankrupt, they can take out debt relief orders. There are different things that people can use, not to avoid paying, but to ensure that they aren't forced to pay their debts, the debts that they can't pay. There's a new process coming in during this year. It's called breathing space, where people can register and come to an agreement with their creditors and the way they pay those debts back. This is a new process across England and Wales. And people like the CAB and so on are part of this process. So there are different ways in which people can deal with debts and to gain advice about how to deal with debts. And that's the main message that I'd give to anybody facing debts and who are in difficulty, that they speak to us that they do receive advice from someone like CAB, and that they don't try to avoid the problem and to run away from the fact that they owe the council money, because at the end of the day it's a tax and the council will do its utmost to collect the council tax debts. But because people should give priority to paying the council tax. But as I say, we'll try and work with people. But to do that, they'll have to approach us. If they run away from the problem, well, we'll just follow the process. And one day they might have the bailiffs knocking on their door looking for a payment just because they haven't spoken to us. So it's better if they speak to us earlier rather than later as a council. And I'd ask you to inform anybody in your ward who approaches you with debt problems, if you could tell them about that. Thank you. Yes, you're quite right. It's important that they do discuss these problems and not just hide away from them. Thank you.
I've got another hand up. I think it's Alan Roberts, isn't it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mark, you referred to school balances. This is a technical question to an extent. We're now aware that examination fees will be up to half the usual level. That is, they'll be paying half the examination fees. If they've already paid, or if they've partially paid, will the savings be shown in this year's balance sheet or next year's balance sheet? Because we're in between two financial years. We will have included the best assessments we have about what the payment should have been. So if the schools have paid more, we would have included the repayment. If they hadn't paid enough, we would have accrued for the money we think they should have paid. So we've included the best possible assessment in the accounts. We try our best to put expenditure against the year in which the service is received. That's the policy and those are the rules. So the schools and the accountants will have undertaken that assessment. So if we're waiting for a repayment, we will have accounted for it in 2020-21, if we're aware of it. But we aren't always aware of that, from what I understand. A number of the schools want a higher repayment and so on. So the conversation is ongoing, I think, between WJEC schools and, of course, the Welsh Government. So no, we won't know the final figure perhaps for some time again about the exact level of the fees. The accountant always looks at the worst case scenario. So we will have included the highest figure in terms of the payments. So if schools succeed in agreeing a lower figure, well, the difference between what's in the accounts and what they actually pay would fall into next year's accounts. As a final comment, I'd say it's the teachers themselves who've undertaken a lot of the assessment work. The burden of the work has fallen on them this year. You know, so schools shouldn't have paid so much in fees to WJEC. Just to note, when we set the budget, we did devolve the budget for what schools needed to run the school if they had been open throughout the year. So some of the increase in balance is due to the fact that schools' costs have been lower than the budget they received. The council hasn't taken that money back from schools. It just feeds into the schools' balances.
Very much. I've got a hand up for John Griffiths, but I'm wondering if that's from this first question. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, cyfeiriad rhywbeth ar y ti...
Just referring to something that you mentioned in your report, which is the council's liabilities concerning the pension scheme. It says that there is a deficit in the fund and that there is an intention to increase the contributions over the rest of the workers' working life, bearing in mind that the liabilities in 2018 were £102 million, and by now it's 176 million. Is everything okay? Is the staff's pension fund safe? Just to explain, first of all, there are two types of valuation undertaken on the pension fund. What we have here is the assessments for the accounts, and that takes place annually, and it is based on specific figures used by the actuary to make an assessment for the accounts. And then every 3 years, the actuary undertakes an assessment of the value of the fund in order to work out the employer's contributions, and the assumptions used for that are different. So both processes come up with two different figures, first of all. Also, as I said, the figure does change quite quickly. Perhaps if they undertook the exercise one now, they'd come up with a different figure. The problem we have is that they work out what the liabilities are for the fund. So they work out for me, I'm this age, this is how much service I've got, this is how much pension I'll receive when I retire. They think that I'll live to whatever age. So if I retire age 67, they might assume that I'll live until I'm 80. So I'd be receiving 13 years of pension. So then they work out that the pension fund will have to pay this sum. What they do then is to discount that figure, because £1 today is worth more than it will be in 20 years' time. So they include the discount factor, which tries to work out the value of money in future and working it back to the value of money today. And so they use gilt rate as the discount rate. So what's happened is that the gilt rate has fallen, which is what the government sells their bonds for. And then that means that the discount rate is lower. So £1 today, and the figure they work out for the value of today's pound in 20 years' time is higher because the discount rate is lower. I know it's a bit odd, but that's how it's worked out. So that liability is driven by the gilt rate. If the gilt rates are low, the discount rates are low, and then the liability increases. So hopefully, as we come out of these current problems and we borrow less money, there's less demand for gilts, the gilt rate will increase, meaning that the discount rate will increase, which will mean that the liability comes down. So it's all linked to the country's economy. You know, yes, you can accept that and be frightened by the figure that there's a deficit of 176 million in the pension fund. But whilst the fund is ongoing, whilst you have members still joining the fund and paying their contributions, the scheme is still open. So that debt will never crystallise, as they say. If the fund came to an end and nobody joined and paid into the fund, the only thing the fund would have is a lot of bills to pay and no income coming in. Well, at the moment, that isn't happening because you've always got income coming in and expenditure going out. So this is just a paper figure. I wouldn't be too concerned about it. At the last valuation in 2019, I think, the actuary worked out the funding level, and Anglesy's part of the fund was around 100%. It's been a lot lower than that. It's been something like 90% for Anglesey. I'm just looking at the portfolio holder who also represents the council on the pensions board. Perhaps he might be able to help me out with these figures. But the last valuation did show that the fund is in a very healthy position. So there's no problem with the fund being able to pay out pensions to pensioners who have been members of the fund.
Bod unrhyw berson sy'n ymuno efo'r gronfa
Or
pensiwn
that anyone joining the pension fund today won't get their pension when it's due in 20, 40, 50 years. The fund is based on the idea that it just carries on and people will continue to pay in and pensions will continue to be paid out. So I'm not concerned about this figure. As I've said, it's just a figure on paper. The figure I'm most concerned about all the time is when they value the fund and work out the employer's contribution. There wasn't much change last time it happened, and I hope it won't change much during the next evaluation, because we do have to fund that as a council and it does have an effect on the council tax. So if the employer's contribution goes up because there's a deficit in the fund, well, we have to fund that. But I wouldn't be worried about this figure at all. It's just a figure for the accounts. I hope that I've explained that. Yes, thank you, Mark. I think I understand this a little better now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Dylan, did Robin want to make any comment?
Yes, in terms of the pension fund, you have to forgive me, I don't have the figures in front of me, but the last meeting I attended with the pension managers, Hymans, which was around 5 or 6 weeks ago, and if I remember correctly, the figure was around 2.3 billion of money within the pension fund as a whole. So the pension fund is in a healthy position at the moment. We do have another meeting tomorrow, but this is a training meeting. But of course, the details are available on the Gwynedd Council website. But it's just that I don't have them to hand at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've got Dylan next, and then I've got Dilwyn.
And Jeff's been waiting for some time as well.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'll let Jeff go first because he has been waiting for some time. If that's okay, thank you.
I'm very sorry. I don't have visibility all that good here. They flash a lot. Okay, sorry, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a query regards page 157, and it's on note 2 housing stock, which is therein. And I note that it actually states that the COVID pandemic affected the council's ability to purchase former council houses and commission new properties. And I note that from 2019 to 2021, all that has been actually acquired, either from purchasing or from commission build, is 1 flat and 2 houses. And this I regard as a dire situation. In the month or so that I've come back, I've had to see people who are living in the most horrific, unfit, unhealthy, unsafe houses with an inability to acquire anything from the council to support them. And I wonder that should the pandemic have not have affected us in this stage, from 2019 to 2021, there must have been an expectancy, a forecast as to how many properties they would have purchased and how much money they would have put in to commission newly built properties. Now, as they haven't been bought and they haven't been commissioned, how much money is sitting somewhere in reserves or otherwise which hasn't been spent as a result. And what are we now doing to ensure a reversal of this? Because this is up to 31st of March. Are we now buying again? Are we now commissioning properties again? So there's two questions there. Where's the money gone, which would have been set aside for this purpose? Is it in reserve somewhere? How much is that money? And how are we progressing it to try to assist the absolutely dire situation? And it's more dire than I think most of us realise. And I've been to see situations where life is under threat because of our inability to assist.
Right, I'll try and split the question up as best I can to answer it. Firstly, of course, the council submits its 30-year business plan to the Welsh Government with its long-term plan for the addition of new housing stock. Over the first 5 years of the plan, there was an intention, I think, to add 200 units in the first 5 years. The figures there are slightly misleading because we did take control of some units before the end of March 2020. So they were counted as stock, but they weren't actually in a position to be let. So they were let early in the new financial year. So the actual new units that have come into use and have been let during 2021 is more than 3. I'm not sure if you're aware there are units in Holyhead. There are a number of sites in Holyhead where we have now added new properties. There's units in Caergeiliog, in Moelfra. There are a number of projects that are close to completion or have been completed since the end of March 2021, which will add to our housing stock significantly. Where does the money go? Well, the business plan of the council is based on firstly using the balance of the housing revenue account, and the balance of the housing revenue account, if I'm is 9.7 million. So the way the housing revenue account works, tenants pay their rent, and there's about 15 million-ish that comes in rent from tenants or from tenants who are in receipt of benefits, housing benefits, universal credit and the like. The cost of the revenue cost of running the stock is around 10 million. That's estate management, general repairs and maintenance, administration, collecting the rents, all the things that you need to run the stock we have. So that makes about a surplus of about 5 million on the revenue side of the account. We then have the capital side, of course. So that revenue surplus is used to fund capital expenditure. That's maintaining the existing stock up to WHQS standards. And then we have the funding for additional new units. Now, the first place we go will be the balance of the HRA account, the 9.7 million. Now, long term, the intention is to run that balance down to around 1 million. So there's about 8.7 million of money sitting there to fund new properties in 21-22. When that money is exhausted, the HRA will then use its ability to borrow, and the business plan works out how much the HRA can borrow. Now, I think we've been a little bit conservative with the amount we have allowed to the HRA will borrow. And there are discussions that are going on with Welsh Government about can we be a little bit more generous or a little bit more expansive in what we do, using our ability to borrow a bit more. Because at the end of the day, what we borrow is paid back, the principal and interest is paid back from the rents that are generated. So when we look at an individual development, we will look at how much it will take for us, how much we have to borrow, what's the annual repayment of the principal and interest, and how much additional rental income that will generate. And if it pays for itself over a period of 30, 35 years, then that's a scheme we will do. We will borrow and we will build the houses, let them to local people, and use that income that's generated the additional rental income then to pay back the principal and interest on that borrowing. So there is scope for the HRA to expand and increase the number of units it has. Of course, there are constraints on that. First of all, we need land, then we need contractors, then we need people to put a project together and a project team and to run it and do the negotiations with our developers, because we can, and what we have been doing is developers have been building properties at their risk, and then we buy them off them as completed units, or we can contract ourselves and pay contractors to build units for us on our land. So there's a bit of a mix, but all of that needs managing. So yes, we'd like to do more quickly, but there are constraints around land, contractors, and the internal capacity to do all this work. But I don't know if you've read the business plan. The business plan does give details of where we intend to build, how many units we intend to build, and how we are going to finance it. And we follow that document. That document is reviewed annually. But COVID did create problems, of course, because nobody did anything for 3 months. We couldn't get a contractor to do anything for 3 months. And then you have issues with, sites, access to sites, making them COVID secure. But I think we've come over that now, and work has started to pick up and increase. The council also intends or plans to buy around 10, 15 former council houses that have been sold under the right to buy scheme. We do buy them back when they become available, if they're in the right area where there is housing need and the price is right, and the cost of bringing those properties up to WHQS standard isn't too prohibitive. Yeah, so it depends how the property is being maintained, because any property that we buy back, we can't let until it's reached WHQS standard. So we do buy some back as well, but the selling of properties also sort of died a death for 3 or 4, 5, 6 months during the lockdown periods as well. So that also reduced the numbers of those type of units that we bought back.
Mark, thank you for that, some of that information. But my point is, at the end of the day, we've managed to acquire, and you say it's more, and I will look to see those figures, 1 flat and 2 houses over a 2-year period. We have 500 plus on a waiting list. We have another 500 in homes, which you wouldn't put anybody. They're just dire. And I'm just worried about, because I'm aware of how private houses are being bought at the moment. They've been, as soon as something's up, it's being sold. But we still have this dire need to supply some type of housing with council support for these people who are in such terrible situations. And I'm thinking to myself, you have £11 million in reserves, much more than I've ever seen. And it's maybe time that we should be saying, look, let's invest in our people, let's invest in our island, let's invest in our housing stock and go ahead. Because I wouldn't want to come here next year and look at this and see we've bought 10 council houses and we've maybe assisted with half a dozen more commission built houses. I want to see where we suddenly going to be investing in 200-300 properties, because that is the current need. And I'm saying, and this is my view, rightly or wrongly, if we have money in reserves at this moment in time, let's put them to a positive use and assist the island-wide community.
I don't disagree with what you say. I think that's the overall intention of the council. The speed or the pace has picked up over the last couple of years. We are now developing more. We've got a lot of sites where we are building new houses. I would question your comment about properties that are in a dire state. All the council's properties that are let must reach WHQS standard unless the tenant has refused the work. So if we're letting properties, all of them are WHQS standard, apart from those where the tenant has said, no, I don't want the work. So they've all had new kitchens, new bathrooms, new heating systems, rewired, etc. So
no, maybe I said it wrongly then. I wasn't even relating to council-let properties.
Okay.
The properties they are putting the public into because they can't acquire. So they're putting them into private households. And those private households, which should be up to a certain standard, from what I've only observed in this last month or so, are putting people's lives at risk. I've seen some dire things in just 1 month, and I am saddened to see what we are, our inability to provide a council house, thus putting them into these hovels. So I wasn't relating to, as I think I maybe indicated, because I am aware the council does ensure that there is a standard of the property. They are directly responsible for letting in their own name. But they are indirectly responsible, in my view, because of the lack of those properties. They're having to say, well, sorry, we haven't got a property for you. You can go to potentially an hotel in Carnarvon or somewhere else. Or if you want to live here, this is a potential landlord, and you can have one room in a multi-let property, but it is not suitable. And especially with emergency housing, I've seen one particular case, and obviously for data protection, I wouldn't mention that it's private, but I've seen one case where some of the family, in my view, of an health and safety risk, which potentially puts one or more of the family in dire risk. I've already brought it up with the council, so this is not maybe the area for that. But I was only interested in this because I suddenly become aware of the lack of progress. 2 houses, 1 flat in 2 years. And though you were telling me there's a lot more, I'm going to ask a question somewhere to show me where all this new housing stock is and how we get some of the names off the 500 plus who are on the list into them.
Mr. Kadiri. Thank you. Can I just, I was going to call in the chief executive. I could see her waving. I'll take you before anybody else and you can respond to
Yes. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr, Cynghorydd Jeff Evans.
Thank you, Councillor Jeff Evans, for raising this matter, so that you can receive more details and ask more questions. The next briefing session for all elected members does concern housing issues and will be focusing on housing. So I can assure you that more than that has taken place, but it's totally right that you ask these questions. And I think that briefing session would be an opportunity to ask the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to revert back now to Dylan, and then I've got Dilwyn next.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a brief comment, and I just wanted to refer to page 7 of the report, which outlines the council's financial standing and associated risks. And just reading paragraph 3323, which reads as follows: the UK leaving the European Union could lead to a number of risks. The council will no longer receive European grant funding, and there is no certainty on any replacement funding. Now, Wales had been receiving £375 million per year from the European Commission, and I think we're all very well aware on Ynys Môn how we have positively benefited from a number of projects on the island that had received European funding. Now, going forward, funding will come from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and the UK Cabinet Minister, Mr. Robert Jenrick, has claimed that Wales will not miss out in terms of regional aid funding following Brexit. And I know that concerns have been expressed both by politicians locally and nationally that the funding now will be shared out by the UK Westminster government and not the Welsh government. And I just want to express my concern that we really need, going forward, to monitor whether or not we continue to get our fair share of the cake. We won't know until later this year how the funds are going to be allocated, and then they'll start coming through next year. And I think it's very important that as we monitor going forward the funding that we received, whether or not we do indeed get that fair share or whether or not we miss out. So I just want to make that comment in relation to what's contained in the report. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. Does anybody want to come back to Dylan on that before I go to Dilwyn? Is any? I can see.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I thought it would.
Just gwybodaeth.
Just for information about this funding, there is a Community Renewal Fund and the Levelling Up Fund. As council officers, we have been working on the Community Renewal Fund. Of course, this is a competitive process, but as a council, we did establish strong governance so that everybody had an equal opportunity to submit their applications. Those applications were assessed, and then an application letter was submitted. The Councillor Rees is correct. It is a competitive process, and we don't know on the basis of the projects that were submitted, we don't know what the outcome is for that grant at the moment. Then the Levelling Up Fund, the applications for that fund will be taking place later on. Anglesey was categorised in category 2. We weren't a priority area, and that is a concern to us as an island and other areas in North Wales as well. Gwynedd was actually in category 3, but the process for applying for that funding will happen later on. The window for applications is very tight. I must praise the island's economic development team, who haven't just been helping with business grants and Mark Jones's team, but they've also had to respond to these applications. They've worked with communities. They've assessed and helped people make applications in a very short period of time. It's been challenging, but we'll see what the outcome is of the Community Renewal Fund. So that's just for information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to Dilwyn. I think he's got a question.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Dylan Rees before me, I'd like to refer to page 7 of the accounts. It's all, well, page 7 of the accounts, or 55 in the pack. A detail on 3321. It says that Welsh Government an increase of 2.75% in council tax. Where does the 2.75% come from, please?
Increase.
The 2.75 was the decision of the council on the level of the increase of council tax to balance the budget, based on the standstill budget which we produced, which is basically the previous year's budget increased to meet the same level of demand for the new year's prices. And then there was additional funds that went in where we knew that we needed investment in certain budgets. You then take off what we receive in the aggregate external finance from Welsh Government. That leaves a balance. That's the budget requirement funded from council tax. We know what the tax base is. We divide one from the other and we get a figure of what council tax has to be. And then that works out to be that 2.75 increase in the Band D equivalent council tax. That's just the council's element, not the police element or the town and community council precept element.
Okay, thank you very much. And on the same section 332, if I may, we know that the general balance and general reserve have increased this year. I note that the plan or likelihood in the future years is that as services are increased, recognising the fact that COVID has had an impact.
I'm very sorry. Jeff, you couldn't put your on mute, could you please? Sorry. We can hear you talking. I'm sorry. Sorry.
The issue is whether it is a good idea to use reserves to fund financial expenditure. I know this has come up in previous years. There was a report which we looked at last September, I think, from the Welsh Audit Office that was certainly described as unsustainable, the practice of continued use of reserves to fund any deficits and planned revenue expenditure. Now, the council has agreed that the minimum usable reserve should be, I think, sort of 5%. But there seems to be a dichotomy here between the intentions of the council to reduce the general balance by spending it on revenue and the Wales Audit's report that such a thing is undesirable. Could I have a response to that question now, please?
Yeah, first of all, apart from the 21-22 budget, there has been no planned use of reserves to balance the budget. That's different to what other councils have done. Some of the councils have used their reserves to balance the budget. The decision here has always been that we will set a budget and fund it from the AEF and council tax. This year, 300,000 of reserves has been put in to balance the budget. The comments from Wales Audit Office was regarding the level of overspending which happened in 2 years, in 17-18 and 18-19, where the council overspent its revenue budget, and then that is funded from the council's general balances. And what happened was that the council's general balance fell below that 5% minimum, 5% of the net revenue budget, which is around 7 million. So we got down to, I think it was around 5.7 million, if I remember. Over the last 2 years, 19-20, we underspent, and that took the balance of the reserves back up to the 7 million starting point, which was just under that 5% minimum figure. And this year, of course, we've underspent significantly again, 4.5 million, which has taken that balance up to 11.5 million, which is around 8% of the net revenue budget. So the council's balances have improved, and they're in a far healthier position than they were 2 or 3 years ago. The question is, what should that carrying value be of as a minimum value of general balances? Now, my concern is that as we open up during 21-22, that the demand for services will increase. Now, we've set a budget based on normal level of services. So if you take something like children's services, where the number of referrals went down during 2021, So the number of children on the register as looked after children has fallen because the sources that normally provide them with referrals, schools, etc., youth work, those sort of things, didn't operate to the full level in 2021. So there is a concern and a risk that there will be a spike in demand in certain services, particularly children. Elderly is another one. And we may overspend on the 2021-22 revenue budget because of this spike. Now, how long that spike lasts is another question. So my concern is that people will see a balance of 11.5 million and think, oh yes, we can go on a spending spree. I'm trying to be a little bit more conservative and say, perhaps for the next year or two, that 5% minimum balance needs to be a little bit higher. That's not to say that some of the figures in that general that have caused the increase in the general balance are a one-off because services didn't operate well. We'll never make that up. We'll never have to provide that service. So there is some scope for using some of that general balance to fund particular projects. But the projects, as always, have to have a benefit to the council. It's not just going off on a spending spree. They have to either provide future revenue savings or improve performance or improve customer service, and the executive will make a decision on that. There will be a report that goes to the executive next month on the accounts and on the balances, and asking them to make a decision as to whether they wish to release some of the general balances and some of the earmarked reserves to fund particular projects. So at the moment, like I say, the balance is healthy. There is some scope for some use to fund projects that bring a benefit. It's not just funding normal revenue costs, but like I say, there is a risk that 21-22 the council will overspend because there will be an increased call for services.
Thanks very much, Mark. There is a chance, therefore, that possibly if Wales Audit see this comment, they may comment adversely on it.
Just to let you know, Wales Audit Office have done an update report on financial sustainability of all the 22 councils. So that will come to you when it is. I've seen a first draft. I've made comments on the first draft, and I'm awaiting a revised draft. So it'll possibly be September, possibly when it gets to this committee. But there will be a further report from Wales Audit Office on financial sustainability.
I look forward to that. Thank you. May I continue with the indulgence of the committee? On page 8, I mentioned last year, you've got the only table in the whole of the accounts where you use negative sign rather than brackets. I just find it an inconsistency, which I don't like. And
we'll correct that.
On the next page, 9, on capital expenditure, the programme has made steady progress in year, achieving a delivery rate of 56.7%. During the year in question, we've been receiving reports of the rate of spend on capital projects, and we've always received promises that the rate of spend would increase dramatically and the budget would be justified. Last year, we achieved 68% of the set budget. This year, we've dropped to 56.7%. I'm just wondering whether we should continue as a council to overestimate the budget for capital spend, because it seems to me as if that's what we're doing. It does have a side effect of affecting our treasury management, because with spend undershooting the budget, we might overborrow. And secondly, it may raise expectations amongst the public that lots of things are going to be done and they're going to be disappointed. So I'd just like to make that point. I know a lot of items have already been covered by the meeting, but there is one which I would like to refer to, and it's a matter of wording really, and that's on page 75. I can turn it up myself. There's an expression in here. It's note 4, replacement of assets. Where an asset is replaced, which was part of a much larger asset, but is not significant enough to be componentized, the cost of the new replacement part will be used as a proxy value when the old part is de-recognized. I was just wondering if there's a plain English version of that. Thank you.
I'll respond to that first, and then I'll come back to the capital program after. Yeah. What that is trying to say is, if, for example, we have a building which has a replacement of a boiler, now we have no value for the boiler as a component in that overall asset value, because our value will just value the building. So we have to de-recognise that component as being replaced. So basically what we're saying is, well, we take out the value that has been lost, which is equivalent to the new value that's gone in. So at the end of the day, it makes no difference, because what we de-recognise as a value is replaced by the new value, which is exactly the same. It's just a technical accounting thing that is a bit weird, but I understand. On the capital programme, as I've said before in this committee, it is difficult to spend 100% of the capital value or the capital budget. But this year, or 2021, was an exceptional year, because basically we lost 4 months of spend to begin with. So COVID did have an effect, particularly, as I've explained to Councillor Evans, on developing or building new houses, also on things like planned maintenance work on council houses, because the contractors would have been operating in somebody's house. The COVID regulations made it really difficult for them to work, and some work was not undertaken. So we slipped significantly on the planned maintenance work, and also on the purchase and building of new houses. New schools was also one where, because the executive went back to relook at certain decisions regarding the schools in Llangefni area, the schemes didn't move ahead as we thought, and there was a particularly large underspend on just building new schools. In other words, we hardly spent anything when we were planning to spend about 7 million. There was also an underspend of over 2 million. We agreed with Biffa, the contractor, the waste contractor, that we would purchase, as part of the new contract, a new fleet for them. It was cheaper for us to do it than for them to do it, because we could borrow cheaper than they could. It was around about 5 million was going to be spent, and it was supposed to be spent by the 31st of March. But because of COVID, they had difficulties with their suppliers of the vehicles that were being purchased. So some of that spend has slipped into 21-22. We've now had all the vehicles that were scheduled to be purchased. So things like that have added to the value of the overspend. This is something that the finance scrutiny panel have also raised as a concern and have asked me to look at whether we can set the capital budget earlier than the revenue budget. Because what happens is the capital budget isn't set until March. So by the time you've set the budget, you've then decided what you're going to do and gone through a tendering process, you've lost possibly April, May, June, when works could be undertaken. So the programme is skewed at the moment that it actually is planning to undertake works during the winter months, which isn't the best time to do capital works, particularly outside. So if we can change the timetable of setting the capital budget so it's done earlier, so the tendering processes are then done in possibly January, February, March, so contracts are ready to go in April and May, we can pick up the spend and increase that level of spend. So that's one thing we're looking at, if that's possible. So yeah, we understand the concerns. Last year was an exceptional year in terms of difficulties, but yeah, we do generally underspend, as you've pointed out before, and we are trying to find ways of improving the way we spend.
It looks to me, Mark, as if there's a question mark over the council's ability to spend capital at the rate which are talking around 50 million a year, because of the inability to meet that budget on a consistent basis. And although getting the budget set earlier would obviously be very, very helpful, at the moment we're in a situation that because we're underspending, it suggests to me that there are contracts which are, if you like, being let late. So by the time we come into the next financial year, they're already in progress. So a lot of last year's budget has actually been carried out in this year.
Yeah. For example, of that 50 odd million, we would have we knew that some of them wouldn't go ahead in 2021. So when we set the 21-22 budget, we reprofiled the spend and included that expenditure in the 21-22 budget. That was mainly the schools. The report on capital monitoring that went to the executive on Monday, the executive approved to slip over 11 million of the underspend into 21-22. So that's how we carry the budget forward. So yeah, you are right that contracts that were let in 2021, perhaps a large proportion of the spend actually will incur in 21-22. But we update the budgets to include that. And that figure of 58 million includes the slippage from the previous year. We also get grants during the year. So we add those into the budget during the year. We may not know about them. Things like flooding grants is a good example where Welsh Government will come and say, have you got a scheme? Yes. Here's some money. Have you got the match for it? Yes. Okay. So we add that to the budget. So there are additions to the capital budget during the year as well. And we gain approval for those as we monitor on a quarterly basis. So the executive will approve those increases to the capital budget through the year as well.
Thank you. Finally, I very much look forward to seeing in the Oxford Concise Dictionary the word componentized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't see any more hands up. Is that correct? Does that bring it to a conclusion? I think that what we need now then is to accept or to note the draft statements of account. And I'll need a proposer and a seconder for it.
Yeah, John Griffith proposes.
John Griffiths is proposing, yes. and a seconder. Can I see a seconder? Oh, yeah.
Dylan Rees, seconding, Chair.
Thank you, Dylan. Yeah. So if we could just go around for the rest of the committee to note that these is I think Alan Roberts is still here, so he's just gone.
No, I'm still here. Mr.
I'm very
Chairman.
sorry. Somebody's got.
You know, the screen keeps changing. Derbyn, accept.
You're right. Margaret, Rose.
Derbyn, accept.
Richard Griffiths. I think he's probably gone. Yeah, he sent his apologies. Yeah. Jeff Evans. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but accept, yes.
Yeah. And then Dylan Evans. Accepted. Well, I think, all right, thank you very much indeed. I think that we, in finishing, I think that I know that in the pre-meeting, a lot of credit was given by Mark to Bethan for her work. She hasn't actually spoken. I'm sure she is here, but I think that we ought to note her contribution to everything. And I think, the whole team, the way that they've, kept to those timescales in a very difficult time, because they were doing a lot of other work besides this, particularly dealing out Welsh Assembly grants and things like that. And I think, the committee must be very grateful for all that. Marion is the first time ever I've never heard her speak, but I think she's done it so much previously, but I know she has been here. But I would like to thank everybody. And of course, I always thank the clerk to the committee, but she never puts it in the minutes. That I thank her for her diligence in the way that she does the meetings, and does the minutes, and we do appreciate that very, very much. So with that, all I can say is thank you very much indeed for attending. I thought it's been some very good points raised. There's great contributions, and Mark, you've worked really exceptionally hard there, Mark, to have taken all that on. Jolly well done. So with that, I'll just say thank you very much indeed all for your attendance and also for all your contributions. Thank you very much indeed.